Welcome back to the Life Legacy Podcast. Today, I'm super excited to bring on my guest. It's Devin Paulsen, which we have a ton of mutual friends, and we've gotten to hang out a couple times. And I've just gotten the tip of the iceberg of his story. And I can tell it's one of the stories that makes you realize how amazing our lives are as well. It sounds like it's one where you've had to overcome a lot of great, unique challenges that have built you to who you are today. So just honored to bring you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want to help our audience kind of get to know you. And to start, I want to know like what's most important to you? What do you care about?
Yeah, I would say for me, probably some of the most important things in life are friends, service, and right now it's been really important for me, just like this lifelong pursuit of learning.
Mm.
I think no matter what's going on in my life, I've found that like pursuing some sort of like learning in some
Mm.
sort of form has provided me like the most fulfillment that I can.
Yeah.
Um, but definitely service.
Mm.
That's for sure like the only way that I could sort of made it through life.
Service. I love the subject of service. It's Arthur Brooks. I think his book is actually right back here. He talks about the foundations of living a fulfilled life. And he's a Harvard professor that dives deep on the art of fulfillment, which is something I care about so much. And so I think there's four pillars that he talks about, and it's having a good family relationship, having a good relationship with friends, believing in a higher power, which can be God or a bigger purpose, and serving. And
Totally.
then you add Tony Robbins, where he would also say progression, consistent progression. So service is such a beneficial factor that I think we all want to be a part of, but it's hard to, put the time in to have a planned out act of service.
Yeah, totally.
Have you found anything that's helped you in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's kind of service has become sort of like just a natural part of my life. I think, and I think service is at some points in my life has been like trying to find like, the homeless person and like give them a meal or like, go to a shelter and do like that kind of service. But I think we're in a sense of like just serving the people in my community, like around me, like my close friends, like neighbors, just doing like small acts of service. I think it became really important to me. Um, there was a point where I was struggling to find like gratitude,
Hmm.
and like feel like deep connection with my like friends. And so I started looking for opportunities to just do like anonymous service to them,
Huh.
just so I could get like a deeper sense of like fulfillment and care for them. And so I would just do like random acts of small things for them without ever mentioning it. And that sort of created like a good habit for me to
Hmm.
be able to just look for what people need, more like being aware of what people are struggling with or just small things in their life that they need and just being willing to just do something for them, without word or without saying. So
Yeah. Just, and I think that from what I've heard, everything that people have said about you is around loyalty and your positive impact in helping other people live like a better life. And I think you add that to people just from what I've seen on an exterior perspective. Something that's helped me with service, when I was reading a book and going through the most important things in people's lives, and I learned how crucial service is. I decided I need to put a metric around service and how I
mm,
can be more proactive with it.
yeah,
And so I've decided 5% of everything that I earn, I have a separate area where I keep that. And so for like the holiday season, in my notes, I have an area where it's like what I'm doing with that 5%.
mm,
And I think when you kind of put it out to the world, like I have this set aside for serving, and it doesn't have to be monetary. It can be your time, it can be your efforts. I like to do monetary because it keeps me abundant in my finances and things like that.
Totally.
But it's opened up a lot of really cool experiences that I've had that I was not expecting.
Yeah.
And they've kind of came to my doorstep because I put that in place. And I feel like God has helped me be an instrument for some families through that experience.
Yeah, totally. I feel like just being like having some sort of metric or a goal like that is so good because if you are like thinking about it, like consciously trying to make a decision to serve, I feel like that's where the benefits of service come from. And like that's how it becomes easy to serve, is just like consciously thinking of ways to do it rather than just like waiting for an opportunity to show up at your doorstep.
Yeah, 100%. And it, I feel like it's getting to be a known thing, but when you serve, of course that's benefiting the other person, but it brings this real sense of happiness and joy knowing that you're trying to help other people. So I love it a ton.
Yeah, totally.
But let's go back to you and your story. Kind of paint a picture of your childhood and what was really important and pivotal in your world.
Yeah, so I grew up on Guam. I was born in a homeless shelter. Um, my mom was pregnant with me at the time. She had a really hard life and um, was prostituting for a good amount of her life, and so I was pregnant via that. And so we were in a homeless shelter. She had me, my dad, who at the time, who I for most of my life believed was my biological father. Um, they got back together or something at some point while we were in the homeless shelter shortly after I was born, and they had pretty much a normal life. My whole childhood, I thought I had a pretty normal life. Um,
How long were you in a homeless shelter?
my mom was just pregnant with me, and then
Okay.
I don't know how many weeks or months after I was born, we were there. But I think the stories that she tells, I'm assuming I was like a month or two. She had all these stories about me, like all these like Polynesian women like playing with me and like my on my little bikes and stuff in the shelter. Um, so but I mean after that, like growing up, thought I totally had a totally normal life. Went to school. My mom was super like involved with school. Like she came to school with me like every day, like just cause. Um, and things were pretty good. Had a super fun life growing up on Guam, just beaches, trees, climbing trees, running around the jungle, fishing. It was like a lot of fun. Then we moved to Vegas when I was in fifth grade. We got into a car accident in third grade and ended up getting like a settlement from that. So that we got hit by a drunk driver.
Dang.
And so my mom used the money for that to move us to Vegas because my sisters had been living out there. And that was a really hard point in my life, I think, to switch from, like I started entering like puberty and like I'm in a new place. My dad stayed there in Guam. It's just me and my mom. We didn't have a car. So a lot of my like middle school, like high school life was like super like built around this idea of like not having a car and like having to like walk to the grocery store with my mom and like haul our groceries back or like walk. For some reason, I didn't like qualify for a bus to school. So like I had to walk like 3 miles to school in the morning and it was like the worst thing on earth. Like I hated it. And they were like,
Did you hate it for the physical aspect of it, or was it like, did it feel demeaning, or what was the hatred towards it?
I think it was mostly the physical, like just like, finishing practice after school and then you have like a 3 mile walk home. And I have like my
Yeah.
big duffel bag of like all my stuff for school and my practice gear. And then like I was like on a dance team for a long time actually in middle
Mm.
school and high school. And my studio was like 10 miles away or something. And there were like multiple nights where I had to walk like 10 miles home in the middle of the night because we practiced from like 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes.
Yeah.
And so then I'd be walking home.
And this is Vegas too.
Yeah, it's in Vegas and it's like, yeah, so I'd always walk around with like my keys and my fists and stuff. Um, so yeah, it was like a lot of my middle school, high school life was, I kind of look back at it and think of what I learned from that experience of
Yeah.
like just if I want to do something, like you just had to do it, like no complaining. Or like I was going on a trip one time with some friends and they were like, "Hey, can you bring like water bottles for the road trip?" And so I carried this case of like the water bottles for 2 miles, just walking
Gosh.
to their house because I didn't have a ride to get to their house and I didn't want to ask them to pick me up. So like memories like that, just kind of really touch my heart and makes me like super appreciative for things that I have now.
Yeah.
Um,
What was that like when um wasn't your biological dad, but that was like your father figure, him staying in Guam and you guys leaving? Do you, like what did that feel? Do you remember too much of like what you thought about that?
I was pretty relieved, honestly. He was pretty toxic person. He was great for many reasons, but definitely struggled with a lot of things that he needed to figure out and still figuring out. Um,
You said still figuring out, like, do you have contact with him
I
or?
probably last time I talked to him was when my mom had passed away and like called him and stuff. But yeah, he was pretty toxic. He was pretty abusive. Um, so like I remember leaving, I was just like I thought I didn't really understand why um he was leaving or like why he wasn't coming with us, but I remember being sort of like happy about it.
Mm,
Um, my mom and dad like were never like traditional. Like my dad slept in the living room. My mom had like her room, then I had my room.
mm.
So it was like always like kind of a weird dynamic, and he was just like pretty abusive. So, um,
To you and your mom or?
I would say he was pretty emotionally abusive to me and like my nieces and nephews, physically abusive, at times. To my mom, not so much. They always fought, but like, um, they just had an interesting relationship. It was pretty weird.
Yeah.
Um,
So what does that do to a little kid?
yeah, I mean, I think it definitely like, um, I like love reading about like attachment styles,
Yeah.
and it definitely messed me up in a lot of ways. Just always trying to guess like what he wanted from you. There's this video that we used to have, but unfortunately we lost like all our home videos. We tried to send it to someone to digitalize, and they like totally lost everything.
Oh,
But there was this video, my mom hated it, and it was of me. I was probably like just walking, so like I don't know, one or two,
yeah.
and my dad's just like antagonizing me on the camera. He's like just like screaming at me, yelling at me to like come down the stairs and like whatever. And I'm trying to like get my mom's attention the whole video, like just crying for like 30 minutes, and they're just like ignoring me. My dad's just like kind of antagonizing me the whole time. So I think like having to like figure out what your parents are like thinking or feeling or like trying to get their approval in some sense has definitely like had a huge influence on who I am today. But I think it's been beneficial in the fact that it's taught me a lot about like empathy and like being able to like read people pretty well.
Mm.
Like I think I have a good understanding of like how my friends are doing or like how a person is feeling in a situation because of that.
Yeah. I think like I haven't gone through physical abuse, but I think those are powerful moments where there's trauma you have to work through, um, in the hard moments of life, but they can become some of your greatest strengths because you've felt those hardships. There's a there's a quote by Robin Williams. He said, I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy because they know what it feels like to be absolutely worthless and they don't want anyone else to feel like that. And I imagine when there's that, physical abuse as well as the emotional abuse and all that, like you can feel so sad and feel worthless. And like as a little kid, you don't know, life. But I think one of your greatest strengths that I've seen is your ability to elevate the room in either humor or just being like that loyal friend that does little acts of service that your friends don't even know about. And that can be some of the beauty that comes out of these hardships.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice of you.
Yeah. So, okay, going back to your story with your mom and that, and then kind of living in a way where you have like extra hard physical tasks. And what were some of the biggest pivotal moments in your childhood going through those things?
Yeah, I think um there are like a couple key moments in my life when I look back at and I think of, like that moment I was changed. One was when I moved to Vegas for sure, and like having to like deal with all of that and like sort of feeling like a second class citizen almost. Like in Guam, I was like super smart. I mean, nothing really changed, but like when I moved to Vegas, that academic system was slightly ahead.
Mm.
So I'd like gone from always like doing really well in my classes to like coming to Vegas, and now I'm like basically felt like a quarter behind.
Mm.
Like, and so because I moved in the middle of the school year, and so like that like sort of insecurity of like not feeling like I was good enough, and then like never having rides anywhere. Like my mom couldn't drive me anywhere, and like it felt like all my friends had like all these super like awesome parents and that were super involved in their lives, and so like I always kind of felt like insecure about that kind of stuff. That was a huge moment for me. I would say the next was um, probably so in middle school or early high school. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I found out that my dad that raised me had like molested one of my like nieces. And so I think that had caused like a lot of pain in my life. Kind of put like a pretty big divide between me and my mom. And so there was like a stretch there where like I was like this super big like mom's boy like all growing up, and then we moved to Vegas, and there's like a slight divide because like puberty and like figuring that stuff out. And then that happened, and I think I just was like pretty like angry um, with a lot of that, and so um, that was a huge moment for me. The next was um,
With that one, really quick, with that happening, and it's like, why did you feel anger towards your mom?
I think I was really mad because no one had like told me,
Mm.
um, and I think
So the secrecy of
yeah,
issues.
yeah, and it kind of I don't know what difference it would have made to have known like what had happened and stuff, but um, that was happening
Yeah,
all throughout my childhood, I guess, and like I was with I grew up with all my nieces and nephews and stuff, and so to never hear about that kind of stuff was I think it was just more shocking than anything. I think my natural reaction was to be angry.
that's interesting. In my world, my parents got a divorce when I was in junior high, and there was that secrecy aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I later learned that like the majority of all the issues in their marriage was coming from my dad. But I always took it out on my mom,
Hmm.
and I that's probably one of my bigger regrets I have in life, that I gave her, the troubled teen years, like all my issues. I kind of like was just mad at her for it when
Yeah.
she was literally trying to protect the family and my father's image for us,
Mm-hmm.
because she just is such a loving, pure lady. And
Yeah.
I that's always been a hard thing that's never settled,
Yeah.
and
Totally.
I always am like trying to make up for that.
Yeah. 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 It's funny how I feel like moms are like the first one to get like catch the blade.
It's so sad, but it is true.
Yeah. Um, but I'd say like skipping down the line, probably the biggest changes were once I started like looking into Christianity and the church. So like from my childhood, like, everything was pretty, I was pretty like angry kind of guy, and I had like super bad anger issues, a bad temper in high school. Um, I mean, I lived like a pretty stereotypical like Vegas kid life, I guess, like partied a lot, did drugs, drinks, the whole 9 yards. But there was like a certain point in my life where I had realized, um, like, oh, I don't really want to like keep doing this. Um,
Do you remember that moment?
yeah, we would after class we would like go. Me and some buddies we would go like to the park, and then we would smoke, and then we'd get lunch. It was like a pretty typical routine for us.
Yeah.
It's like my junior year of high school, and we went to the park. Um, and I remember just thinking, I was like, I'm kind of over this, and so I like handed all my stuff to one of my buddies. I was like, I'm gonna go back to school, and so I just left. And it wasn't like a big like moment. Didn't feel like a big, I
Yeah.
just was kind of like, why am I doing this? Like, this isn't, it just seemed stupid to me at the time. And so, but ended up being like a huge turning point for me. There's like a lot of little factors that played into sort of turning my life around from there. Um, my club track coach was a pastor. And so after practice and stuff, he would, we'd start practice with a prayer. He'd invite us to his house for like Bible study, on like Tuesdays, and we'd go over. This is the first time I started like figuring out Christianity for myself. Um, and then there was sort of like this big, around this time, my mom and one of my sisters had started, um, doing drugs again, and it was pretty bad. My sister, she ended up going to jail for a long time. But I was just like really confused and frustrated at this point in my life, my junior year of high school. At one point, my sister came over and like stole a bunch of things from my room. We lived in the same apartment complex, and so I went over to her apartment, and she like, I'm like trying to get my stuff back. She opens the door. She's like very clearly like high on something, and she like pulls a gun out on me and like holds a gun up to my head, and my mom is like in the middle of us in the doorway, and she's like, if you want your stuff, like blah blah, just yelling at me. So I'm like, I'm dealing with this. Like, if you don't want to give me my stuff back, like I'll just call the police. Like, I'm not. So police come. My mom ends up getting like super mad at me for calling the police. Um, and I'm like, she's on drugs. She stole my stuff, and she just held a gun to my head. Like, like, what am I supposed to do? And my
Like,
mom is
what
like,
more do I need to ask for help?
yeah. And my mom is like completely pissed off at me. And um, so that was like a long night. And then I remember going to school the next day. Um, I think after everything was all said and done, it was probably like 4 or 5 a.m. Then I went to school, had like a presentation in English, and just had to pretend like everything was fine. Um, but that point forward, I think, was a big turning point. I was probably like pretty depressed from there, like just pretty low mood. And one of my buddies, who's a member of the church, had like taken notice of it and like asked me if I wanted to go camping or something. And we like went, and we kind of had this good discussion about families. And my perception of families was that they sucked at that point. And my
Well,
whole
how could
like,
it be anything but that?
yeah, yeah, totally. And I just wanted to like, my honestly, like my life plan was always to like get a good job, live in New York, just be a bachelor, have a sweet like bachelor pad, and then like call it good at like 40 years old. Before I got old, didn't want a family, didn't want kids. My mom always told me like, don't have kids, like they're the worst. I believed her, honestly. And so me and my friend were talking about this when we were camping, and he was adopted, his parents were divorced, and he kind of talked about how like he saw it as his responsibility to, um, make his kid's life better than his own. and it kind of like touched me and inspired me in a way that I never thought about before. Um, and from there, I think that was started the start of my like conversion.
And so when you say the start of your conversion, um, in that moment, I guess when you say the start of your conversion, what do you mean?
Yeah, just that was my senior year. Um, they I had like three main like best friends in high school. They were both or all members of the church, and they had never really like pushed the gospel on me, never tried to like get me to investigate the church. They were open about things, would like invite me to like stake dances and like seminary and stuff, but never like really tried to like push anything on me. Um, but before they left on their missions, they gave me a Book of Mormon, um, wrote their testimonies in it, had me read it. And I think looking back, it was definitely that conversation that I had with my one buddy, that sort of like prepared my heart for the gospel.
So when you read the Book of Mormon, what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was like the summer after I graduated high school. Um, because I had stopped like partying and drinking, a lot of my like friends that weren't members that I would hang out with, I kind of stopped hanging out with. They were just, you know, continuing on, and I just wasn't really about it. Um, and so, but then my member friends were all going on missions, or one of them was at BYU for the summer, and so like I kind of had no friends
Mm.
after I graduated, and I was getting ready to go to school in Chicago. Um, and so I just kind of would read the Book of Mormon in my room for like hours, and I kind of was doing it because my friends gave it to me and I thought it was like a nice gesture. I had like zero intentions. Like I was just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I felt the spirit strongly a lot during that period, and had a bunch of tender mercies happen while I was reading the Book of Mormon. Like prayed for the first time on my own, um, and yeah, it was really a life changing period.
Yeah. Looking back, where have you seen God's hand in your life?
Yeah. Um, I think like honestly through all of it, like I feel so like blessed to be where I'm at today. Um, and I've thought about it a lot when I look at the lives of people that have similar situations as me. Um, I can't like I don't know why I ended up like being like so blessed. Um, I don't think there's anything that I did like differently. Like it's the only thing I can put up to is God, like always having a hand in my life, and like there should have been no reason why I was like excelled well in school. Like my mom was like a heavy meth user while she was pregnant with me or before she was pregnant with me. Um and I grew up on Section 8 and like food stamps, and um just throughout the years, like to watch God like just slowly like take care of me and like have my back. Because a lot of times it's felt like it's just been just me. Um, and I know that I'm not capable of like providing for myself in the way that God has been able to. So I think just small things like slowly guiding me.
Yeah,
I felt.
it's so cool because I imagine statistically, like you should probably either be in jail or dead at this point, like with your upbringing. And so it's such an honor that um, you've gotten to get to where you are now, and I think there's part of that where God has for sure played his hand, but you've chosen your choices too, which I think you need to pat yourself on the back on on being able to excel in school and noticing the little differences of and acting on what you want in your life, which, and I think those are the big differentiators, or allowing God to do his work through you. And so back to like getting those first promptings and the spiritual experiences, what kind of happened after that?
Yeah. So I was like reading the Book of Mormon pretty heavily. Um, Shortly after I went on a like graduation trip to Cabo with
Good spot.
yeah, with, like three of my friends. And I remember I brought my Book of Mormon with me, and we're in the airport. We I think we drove down to San Diego first because one of our friends' parents lived there, and then we flew from San Diego to Cabo. And I was sitting in the airport reading the Book of Mormon. And I'm just like bawling. I don't remember what I was reading, but I'm just like bawling reading the Book of Mormon. And my friends are like so confused.
They're like, just play a game on your phone. What are
Yeah.
you doing?
Yeah. And so we're like on the plane flying to Cabo. And I remember just thinking, I was like, and I don't think I'd read, I don't think there was a scripture that had like mentioned this. Maybe I just assumed that would be the good thing because like I knew my friends' values, but I was like, I'm not gonna like drink or anything on this like graduation trip, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and I just felt really like strongly that I like should do that. So we get there, we go straight to like some bar, and you know everyone's like taking shots, and I'm just like, like I'm not gonna do it. I think I lasted for like 2 days or something, and then we were in a Congo line, and they're like pouring shots on everybody's mouth, and I was like, and so I did that, and I remember feeling like super guilty after, and I think that night was the first night that I had like got down on my knees and said a prayer. We're like in this hotel. I'm sharing a room with three girls, and they're just my friends that I went on this trip with. And I like get on my knees and I want to say a prayer because I feel like super guilty because I, you know, said I wasn't gonna drink and I was drinking. And um, one of my friends like woke up in the middle of the night and like stepped on me, and it was like this whole like funny like scary thing. I was like, she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know." And um but that kind of definitely like affirmed to me like okay like I felt like that was the right thing to do, like just not to drink and to like kind of like stay committed to these sort of values. And then there were little things like, you know, trying to go to school. I was going to school in Chicago for track, and um you know, I had to like fund all that myself. And so I was like, I sold my furniture, sold like my Xbox, like everything, my Apple Watch, everything that I had, to sort of save up money to buy a plane ticket and pay for tuition and stuff like that. And I remember the last thing I had to sell, which was going to be like a good chunk of money, was like my bed and like all my furniture. And I was kind of like stressed out about it because the start of the summer, I wasn't leaving till the end of the summer. I was like, I'm just not gonna have furniture for the rest of summer, I guess. And then some lady out of nowhere like messages me and is like, hey, like, can I buy this from you? Like, I don't need it until the end of summer, but I'll pay for it now. And it was like just a direct answer to like, I don't even know if I prayed about it, but I was just stressed about it. And, you know,
It's what you needed.
yeah, it was exactly what I needed. And that was like a good, like, I was like, God is, you know, is God here, like with me?
Yeah.
And then there were things like, you know, like part-time jobs that came up for the summertime, like help me earn some money, that I didn't think was going to be possible. Um, and I just remember having this like feeling of like peace and like happiness. And I think I remember like writing in my journal that it was like the first time that I'd like ever really cried from like feeling like genuine like happiness and not just from being like mad and sad. Um, and so then I just kept reading the Book of Mormon. Um, and you know, I was kind of thinking about it, like how would if I was baptized, like would my friend's dad have to do it? Like how does that work? I was just kind of curious. So I texted my friend who was at BYU for the summer, and he was like, "Oh, no, like I could baptize you if you wanted." And I was like, "Oh, really? That's cool. Like it's kind of different from like other churches, you know." He's like my buddy. It's like we're the same age, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Then I went to go read another chapter of the Book of Mormon before I went to bed, and it was Second Nephi 30 or 31, or the chapter heading is Christ tells men why they must be baptized. And I just read that chapter heading, and I just felt the Spirit super strongly. And I texted my buddy back probably like 10 minutes later. I was like, okay, I want to be baptized. Um, and then, yeah, so that was like kind of the start of that.
That's so cool, man. And I feel like, at least on my mission, I always love to ask people like after their baptism. I felt like a lot of people were scared to talk about if they felt any changes or like what's the difference of like being baptized and feeling the Spirit more frequently. I'm just curious what did that baptism really mean to you and what felt different after?
Yeah, I think for sure having the Spirit's influence daily, like really cleanses you. Like obviously baptism in and of itself is like a cleansing, like covenant ordinance. Um, but I remember after I'd gone to school to Chicago, after I was baptized, um, I went to BYU the next semester, transferred to BYU, and I felt like it was really there where I sort of like started to figure things out, as far as like my deeper sense of conversion. And I remember seeing my friend's mom, who I'd lived with for a little bit before. Um, she came to pick me up from school, and she like looked at me, she's just like crying, and she's like, your face is just like so much like softer. Like you just have like a softer like countenance, you know? Um, and so I think like having the Spirit's influence can like really break down so many walls, and just completely change who you are, like who I was like in high school versus who I am today, but especially even like who I was like, after I had joined the church was like just so night and day. Um, and like without like much effort from my end, I would say like it really was the effort to like have the Spirit, but it was mostly like Spirit's influence.
Yeah, I that made me think of my growing up. Like my spirituality was kind of crazy. It was like I don't know. I think from 0 or 8 to 11, 12, I would go to church and stuff. And then when my parents got a divorce, I was like a little annoyed with life. And then I found out that my dad, um, we were talking one day, and he told me that he's gay. And in my mind, I felt like I had these two options. I either could choose to follow this God guy that I don't know or really care about that much, or I know my dad's going through a hard time
Mm-hmm.
and I want to like be there for my dad and that loyalty. And so from there till I was 18, I kind of had a negative taste of God in my life. And then I had one super strong spiritual experience where in that day I learned that God is real and that he loves me. And I like where you're talking about you reading and bawling in the airport. I'm like surrounded by my friends and I'm like uncontrollably bawling. And my mom was always strong in our faith as well. Just so strong with God. And I came home that night. It was like 12:30, and I just remember coming into her room, and she always reads her book and she falls asleep and she's got her light on, and so I probably scared her when I came in,
Yeah.
but I was just like, Mom, it's all true. Like God's real and he loves me. And she says like there was a full physical change in my light and my who I
Yeah.
am from that moment forward,
Yeah.
which was so cool.
Yeah.
Just when God gives us those moments of pivotal light.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure that was like the best moment ever for your mom.
Oh yeah. I imagine she'd probably been praying for it for a while.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Um so then at this point you're in college, you're running track. Um are you thinking about a mission? What are kind of next steps of what you're wanting in life?
Yeah, I had, like made the decision to go run track at this school in Chicago, like obviously at some point in high school. Um, and when I got there, it was not at all what I had expected. I think had I not had just joined the church like 2 weeks before, it would have been fine, would have been fun. But um, it's like this small school. Everyone's there to play a sport basically or whatever, and their first time away from home, they're all just partying like crazy. I think there's one other member at the school. She was a senior and she was like in the nursing program. Um, but it was really hard because I'm like trying to figure out my conversion and like my testimony, and I'm like by myself for the first time away from home. And I remember going to trying to go to church the first Sunday that I was there. Um, my friend like Venmoed me for to get an Uber for church because it was super far away. So I like, use the Ward Locator app, whatever, try to find the location, put in the Uber. It's like $40, $50, whatever. I'm like completely broke. I have like a maxed out credit card for everything. I'm like so stressed about money at this point in my life. And the Uber drops me off to where the church is supposed to be, and it's just like in the middle of a neighborhood. There's not a church in sight. Didn't see any churches like driving there. And I just remember like not knowing what to do because like I'm in an Uber. So I like get out the Uber and I'm just like so like frustrated and confused. And I don't remember if I ended up making it to church that day or not, but then I eventually found myself at the family ward. And the bishop, I talked to the bishop. He connected me with someone to like get me rides to church for a little bit until I started going to the YSA, which was like an hour away or so. Um, and so the ward was so far away, I wasn't really like connected with people there. I was so young compared to them. Most of them were like med school students and stuff like that. So I'd really just like spend time with the missionaries that were like in my college town.
Mm.
Um, and I'd go tracking with them all the time. They were like my only friends, really, like my legitimately only like real friends. And I would like, I would, I had like a meal like swipe card, and I would like save up my meals so that I could like swipe them into our cafeteria. Um, and it was like honestly we had so much fun, like just tracking, like um,
Do
and
you have any
so
moments that stick out to you with the missionaries?
um, I remember we went into their like boundaries were pretty big just because it was like greater Illinois.
Yeah.
Um, and so we drive so far away, whatever. And I remember going into this guy's house that they were teaching, and he's like smoking a cigarette, like the house reeks of cigarette smoke, and they're teaching him whatever. And I think more than anything, I just had this like, I don't know if the lesson was all that productive, to be honest, but I just remember having like this sincere like appreciation for the missionaries themselves. Or I'm like, they just reminded me of my friends, and I'm just like thinking of my friends like doing that, and they're just like so, you know, into the work and like so selfless. And so that like touched me a lot. Um, and then yeah, so I think that was like a huge part of me um, wanting to go on a mission. So when I transferred to BYU, I had to wait. I had to wait a year after I joined the church to like go through the temple and stuff. So it was like this year long decision, and it was kind of had like a in my mind it had like a clock on it.
Mm.
And when I was doing the lessons with the missionaries, like my lessons for my baptism, they were like, "Oh, you're gonna be an awesome missionary." Like everyone's like, all my friends like, "Oh, like you're gonna serve a mission. Like you're just like you're gonna be such a good missionary." Like my friends' parents like just mission, 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 mission. And I was like, I honestly hated it,
Mm.
and everyone just kind of like was assuming that I would go. And so I spent like this first semester at BYU like just trying to figure it out. Super frustrating. Um, and then I ultimately decided like I think I just need to go. I think I was in the shower and I was like, I can't make a decision. Like I'm just gonna I'm just gonna go and see what happens.
And so it was just a random, well, not random, but just like a weird feeling like, okay, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, I think I just like I kept trying to go back and forth on like, what the right thing to do is. I felt like guilt for not going, but then I also felt responsibility to be home. Like my mom was going through a really hard time in her life, and um I just couldn't like
Was that with addiction? Like,
yeah, it was like my sister, like I said, she was in jail at this time, and um I had moved out of the house, and so this is her first time in like I don't know how long like being on her own. And then my sister was like her best friend, and she was in jail, and so she was super lonely. Um, and then I think she was coming off of the addiction with she's using drugs so heavily with my sister. Um, and so she was just like all over the place. She'd like call me and like just be like walking around the streets and just like crying, like just like sobbing, like wailing like a baby on the phone. And there were multiple times where I was like, I just need to drop out of school and like go back home. Um, and so like the thought of going on a mission, where at the time like I don't know if I would have been able to contact her because I couldn't email her. She doesn't know how to email, and I don't I don't think they were using like Facebook Messenger at that point. Um, and so it was like a huge like this would be a really, and at the time I also thought I didn't know how much longer she would have, just because of the addiction stuff. And so I was like, I don't know, I like it seems like a terrible idea to go, um, but I decided I would just do it anyways.
and when you did it, like I imagine that had to have been so hard to leave your mom in that time. Talk us through that.
Yeah, I honestly didn't tell her about it until like a couple of weeks before I was supposed to go. Um, and I just remember she had like this like kids it was like a map, like a toy, and it had like the states that you could pull off. And I remember her like showing it to me, and she's like, "Oh, so you're gonna be like in California." And so I like just felt like a lot of guilt, because she was pretty like, oh, thank you. She was pretty like childlike in a lot of ways. Um, and so it was really hard. And I was in MTC for 2 months. I felt a lot of peace going in, honestly. Um, I was in MTC for 2 months, and it was still weighing a lot on my mind whether or not I was supposed to be there or not. And one day I just had this impression that like I needed to go home and like be with her. And I prayed about it for a long time, didn't know if it was right, and ultimately decided that I should follow that. And like that in of itself was like a whole crazy process. Like, and honestly, a really like eye-opening one for me. I remember I had to like talk to my like district president and then like the MTC zone president about it. And I remember going to these conversations about feeling like I needed to go home, and the like zone president's like yelling at me, and he's like, "You don't know how to receive revelation," and like this is just Satan, like blah blah blah, and like just like ripping on me. We had like two separate meetings. He just like ripped on me for a good while. And I remember thinking like this like that is so terrible. And I think the church has gotten like generally more um open-minded about
Yeah.
like what missions are for people. Um, but I just remember coming home from that. Luckily, my thought was like, if that was anybody that was like struggling with their testimony, I think that would be a really hard situation to like, because you hear all these stories about people leaving the church because of leaders and stuff.
Yeah.
But luckily my like testimony wasn't like built around like church leaders. It was around like the Savior. So that helped me navigate that well. But um, yeah, that was a interesting process.
Yeah. No, I I can't imagine when you're being called to come back and be with your mom, and an authority figure is just getting mad about that, and explaining that there's confusion on your side. And sincerely, in my life, in my history, I've had some struggles with church authority leaders. But yeah, it comes down to, like, is God real, and is the Book of Mormon true? Because if the Book of Mormon is true, then that means all of the restoration is factual and it's real and it's true. And I think God calls a lot of people that are unprepared to do big things. Like, if you think of the apostles, I always like to think of Peter. He literally rejected Christ 3 times, and he was able to become one of the greatest leaders in Christianity after doing, like, bad things. Like, he
Yeah,
cut some
totally.
guy's half his ear off,
Yeah.
and like really negative things. And so I like I it's such a bittersweet thing to have God give so much trust to some people, where it's like, why is he trying to decide some life decisions for me? But I always believe in this God takes care of human error,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll make that right.
Totally.
And so it's always hard to hear when people go through hard things with leaders of whatever faith. And but I know God makes up for when people, I always think about tithing. You think of some old lady that has nothing, and she gives like one of her meals to pay her tithing.
Yeah.
If God exists, no matter what church she's in, like, I don't imagine God wouldn't compensate for her actions, even if the pastor or whoever ends up spending that money on, a car or something.
Yeah.
But like, her will and trying to align that with God, I know he brings God's compensation
Totally.
to pass.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Um, so then you come back, and I feel like in Utah, that's a hard circumstance. Like that, I guess in any state. Um, how were you able to get through that?
Yeah, it was funny because again, like I felt like people were giving me like an exception. I was like, oh, like you just joined the church, like it's okay. Like, you know, which is like fair, but my, natural reaction is like, so then if I had not just joined the church, would it not be okay? Um, and so it made me feel a lot for people that came home for missions early because the like sort of judgment around it was like so negative. Um, and even honestly to this day, like even though I felt like pretty confident in my decision, um, even so to this day, like it is still kind of like a weird subject for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's just more of like something you have to explain, which and there have been like really awesome leaders where I've like they've asked me about missions and I've like tried to explain it. They'd be like, you don't have to explain it. Like, you know, yes, you can just say yes, you served a mission. And so it is good to like see like that kind of like nuance in it. But yeah, so I went home to Vegas, then I came back to BYU, and I honestly felt like I had sort of like a chip on my shoulder. Um, because I mean I genuinely wanted to be on a mission and I loved like teaching the gospel and I loved learning about the gospel and it was like really where I wanted to be. And so I kind of had like this like fire coming back to BYU where I was like, like I can still like, spread the gospel in a different way. Um, and so I
Yeah.
would say looking back, I was like pretty like overzealous about like sharing the gospel and like being outspoken about like my testimony. Um, which was great, and I wish I was still like that, honestly. But it was uh it was a fun time, I think, coming back. It was really fun. I was super excited to be there, and um I would say that those next couple of years were pretty like um pretty stable for the first time in my life. There was not a whole lot of change going on. Had a pretty stable job. Things were just like going really well. Um, Made a lot of really good friends at this time, and sort of like solidified like my like circle, I would say, of like support. So it's like a really like strong and like confidence building period of my life that I think I really needed, um, to like make up for, my childhood.
Yeah. And I think the people at home that don't know you, like people that know Devin, like praise Devin, like they love Devin. And so there's the side of like your friends came to you and that, but the value, what I've seen of what you bring to your friends and how they talk about you, it's like you're a sacred human to all of them, which is
Yeah,
just awesome.
I don't understand it. I honestly just feel so like fortunate. Like I don't know, all these like amazing people just came into my life, like kind of seemed like one at a time and like exactly when I needed them. And um honestly, I feel like I just learned so much from them, and their like positivity and like their way that they like looked at life, and it was just contagious. And that's like not my like natural demeanor at all. Like, with my background, like I'm definitely way more uh, naturally pessimistic and like naturally like just in a like lower state of mind, I would say. But just rubbing like shoulders with these people over the years, just like I think more than anything, it just changed my belief of like what life was about. Um,
Well, I think most of your best friends are some of like the most positive humans I've ever met.
yeah, yeah, totally. And
So cool to have.
and I'm so thankful for that because they definitely have a huge influence on me.
Yeah. Um, you brought up your mom passed away. How long's that been? What's that process kind of felt like?
Yeah, it happened in April, so just a couple months ago. It's actually crazy how much time has gone by since then. It's like I think of everything that I've been through in life, it's definitely been the hardest. Um, I've had like a couple of people in my life like pass away before. My sister actually passed away a couple of years ago. And it's funny because I thought when my mom, I'd always, figured it would happen at some point in my life, like soon after I graduated high school. Um, and because of the gospel, like I thought it would be like this really like peaceful, like, good moment. And my freshman year when I was at BYU, I got a call from my sister, and she was like, I think mom's passed away. Like I'm not sure, but um I'm like I'll let you know. Like I'm like really worried about her. And I remember taking that call and having this like sense of peace and like it'll be okay. And I don't know if that was the spirit saying that, she was okay or not. Um but because of that experience, I had sort of this false impression in my mind that because of the gospel and eternal families, like the pain of mortality like wouldn't like be real. Not the case. Um Totally hard, and I don't know, it's just been, I think for the first little bit I just completely tried to distract myself from it. Um I got a call from my sister, and um this time she said that she for sure had passed away. she had got a call from my mom's um, management, like apartment management company, and they went to her apartment because there was flooding outside of her apartment and found her in the bathtub. Um, and it was like probably 7 or 8 a.m. And I remember I'm on the phone with my sister and I'm like, I'm getting out of bed and I'm trying to get dressed. And um, I just like, there's no way like this is real. Like, it's not happening. I drive over to her apartment and I installed like this like code door pad on her back door so I could get in and stuff. Um, I go in there and it's just like steam room, like just hot steam, and there's just water everywhere. The officers are in there and they like are, telling me I need to get out, blah blah. Blah. And her dog runs up to me and she's like super scared, and so I grab her dog and I leave. Um, and then yeah, then they came and talked to me and they confirmed everything, and um, I think I was just mostly in denial about the whole thing. I remember feeling, I can't even describe what my like emotions were in that moment. Um, Tristy had, she was the first person I called and she came and met me there and she was helping comfort me and stuff. And, um, but I think I was, kind of delirious about the whole thing. The next like little bit was super frustrating. My mom was a bit of a hoarder, and so I'm like cleaning up her apartment, and a bunch of people came and helped like clear out stuff. But that first day, I'm just like trying to clear out the rugs from her apartment because they're soaked with water. So I'm like throwing them out on her balcony, and then her neighbor is like pissed, is like yelling at me. Like I have a video of it because I was like in disbelief for like 8 minutes long. She's just yelling at me like, "Your mom was the worst," like blah blah blah.
Oh my gosh.
And she was like really upset that I had like put the rugs out on the balcony because their like balconies kind of connected. And so I like go back and I'm like, trying to load all of these wet rat rugs into probably like 6 gallon bags. Like I did like 6 loads of all these wet rugs, and I'm like trying to haul it to the trash can. And um and then I'm just like hauling out junk, which is just like so annoying. I'm just like pissed at this point because um you know I'd always given my mom a hard time about like hoarding stuff, and I had actually moved her from Vegas to Provo a couple years ago, which was also, but prior to my mom passing, that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, just all kinds of crazy things happened with that process, but I'm like carrying her stuff, like trying to haul things, and like I remember she had like this vase that was like not supposed to be a vase, I guess, but it was like tucked away in something and it fell outside of her apartment and cracked everywhere and there's dirt. And so I'm just like on the floor, like just trying to sweep up dirt with my hand. And I'm just like sitting there and I'm just like crying. I'm just like, this is just so like, frustrating. And I just had every mix of emotions. Um, and still like to this day, like there's like, I don't know, you know, one small thing can just set me off and just kind of ruin my day thinking about her.
It's the first year is insane. Um, it's crazy. Um, just what you've said. I wish it didn't resonate as much as it does. Um, yeah, got the call and it was from his apartment place, and he passed away in a bathtub too, which is kind of crazy.
Jeez.
Um, I think a really important paradigm shift that happened to me because I was driving from Orem to Salt Lake, and when I got the news, and I guess a friend was watching my location, I Cade was the first person that knew Cade Peterson, and I just came out of my room and I was like, I think my dad's dead. It's not a pretty moment in
Yeah.
any shape or form. And um, I probably averaged going like 110, and
Yeah.
uh, I think of that lady that doesn't understand what you're going through, and she's getting mad at you about some stupid rugs, and it's like you are not a human. And so whenever I see anyone like going really fast or doing something dumb in their car, my
Yeah.
first thought now is like they might have just had
That's
someone
yeah,
die, or and
totally.
that was really eye opening to me. But dude, the first year is uh I don't know. It's like Superman's kryptonite, where uh it feels so dark,
Hmm.
and I'm really sorry that that has to be part of your reality. And um I think something special with grief, there's so many different ways that people can cope. And what I've what I've found and what I was really scared about was I did not want my grief to come out on anyone else.
Totally.
And so there's this metaphor where grief is kind of like a river, and if you dam it up, at some point there's going to be a crack and it's going to explode on whatever's in front of it. And so I still have those moments with my dad where I'll get triggered where I I might just need to cry for 5 minutes. I've had times in church where someone's playing the piano, and uh, one of the most memorable things from my dad's funeral was the piano playing, and it's like it's a trigger for me where I've left church just needing to go spend some dad time. But I will say that first year, it feels like you're carrying this new weight that is so big, um, and weighs more than you carrying the water bottles on your back for 2 miles. It's like this weight that is so heavy. But I will say, just being in it for 2 years, that weight, I don't think it changes, but you get stronger, and you will forever carry this weight with you. And it's not a 2 year thing. It's not a 5 year thing. It's not a 10, 15 year thing. Like this will always be with us, but we get stronger. And uh, it's led me to opportunities where I get to have these conversations where I,
Hmm.
I get to feel to some extent of empathy of what you've gone through. And it's just, it's a very horrific, horrible thing that you don't want anyone to go through. But I think part of humanity that's beautiful is that we have similar experiences that we get to go through,
Totally.
and share the great moments, and we get to be there for people in the worst moments. Um, for you, any advice on anyone that's starting a grief journey, or that is losing someone in the future, or just barely lost someone? What would you say to them?
Yeah. I mean, I'm no like not one to speak. It's been, so hard just to figure out for myself, but I think the most important thing that I've learned for myself is just to like have grace with yourself, and to accept that you're going to change and you don't know what that's going to look like, and um, just have like faith in God that He will like continue to like guide you and like be there with you. Um, I think for me, I'm like such a problem solver that after it happened, I was like, okay, it's been like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, whatever. And like, I should be like, getting over, I should be moving along. Like, there needs to be a solution. And anytime I had a conversation with someone about grief, my question was always well, like how long, until it's better? Like, how long, like, it's been like this long. Should I feel like this much better? Was always like my perspective. And, I think I fooled myself for a little bit thinking like, okay, like I know how to handle this, like it's good. And so I just kind of forgot about it. But like you said, like with the dam, like it just built up, and at some point it had to give. And so for me, just like letting myself go through that grief and like, you know, being willing to accept that I might be more alone than I'd like because I don't have like the capacity to, be as social or like to like be as engaged in hobbies or whatever it might be. Um, but to not let that like ruin your self-image or like your, start to think like, oh, my life is going downhill because of this, and just kind of let yourself sit in peace. That's been important for me.
Yeah. That made me think of like your first couple days and maybe weeks. I feel like you're surrounded by angels, everyone like wanting to show their love and support for you. And then one day to the next, everyone's life just goes on. And I noticed when grief really hit for me was like around 6 months. And that's when it was like, I'm starting my real, like, this is horrendous. Like, this is horrible.
Yeah.
And so I feel really fortunate because similar to you, I have some amazing friends. And one of the coolest things that they've done to show up is just um, bring it up every once in a while with me. Just like, hey, how are you doing with it? That it's, there's not much a human can do for someone else that is going through grief except for acknowledge that they're going through
Yeah.
a hardship, like the hardest hardship you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so I always like to tell people just show up for them in any shape or form. But I just noticed that grief really started hitting hard around 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And like the first 3 months, it's not a real, like you're not even living on the planet. Like
Yeah.
it's this weird
Yeah.
weird
Yeah.
phenomenon where you don't know what's going on with life and things don't feel real. And then like 6 months it was like I really don't have my dad
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that's pretty wise what you said. Just um yeah, it's okay to take grief however it is needed. And but I think letting the river flow is pretty important.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like that 6 months mark was like, that was really when it hit me too.
Uh,
And it is kind of funny because, the first, little bit after when everyone finds out, and I was kind of slower to tell people. Um, but everyone like showers you in love, and they're like wanting to support you as best they can. Um, but then yeah, at some point like everyone's lives have to go on. Um, and so I totally agree. Like if you have someone that's going through grief, like I don't know, I feel like a lot of my friends have been, I don't know if it's scared to
yeah.
like ask about it. It's an awkward thing to talk about.
It's a really hard subject that
Yeah.
no one knows how to go about.
Yeah. And so I've appreciated when like one of Trici's parents actually are really good about asking me about it. Um and like just I'm not the type of person to like bring it up like, casually, because I just feel like it's like a dampener, like nobody wants to just.
Yeah.
And so having those people that are, willing to talk about it with you, and not make you feel like a burden for like, oh, every time I see Devin or every time I see Jackson, like we're gonna talk about this and it's gonna be sad.
Yeah.
Because I certainly feel like that. Like I don't want people to like feel like, oh, he's kind of a Debbie Downer right now. So having those people that encourage it is like super helpful.
Yeah. I agree completely. Um it's cool when you have those those lifeguards in your life that are willing to, sit in the waves or swim with you to get you and hold you in, and they can go through the hard moment with you, and they can sit in it for a little bit, and it just means a lot.
Totally.
Um, as we wrap this up, what would you want your legacy to be? Like, if today was your last day, how would you want to honor, your mom and your sister, and like how would you want to be if this was your last day
Yeah.
remembered?
There's this talk by Elder Bednar. It's recognizing the spirit. I don't know if you watch that in the NPC. It's like this long like movie night, that they would do on the Sundays. And he talks about like whether or not how you can like decide if you had a prompting or if it was just like your own thoughts. And his sort of main point is just like, well, just be a good boy or be a good girl, and like everything will be okay. For me, like I've definitely like strived to do that, and like I try not to think too much about whether something is of God or whether something is just like my own like intuition, and just trying to like make a decision and just do something, like doing anything, even if it's wrong, if it's happening quicker, in my opinion, is better than like sitting there and waiting to make a decision. Um, and so I think especially when it comes to service and um, being able to help the people around you, there's so many times where I knew I couldn't help my mom, whether that's because I was living across the country, um, or just because like I just couldn't like physically or like emotionally get to be in a place where I could help her. And so I would always pray for people to like come into her life that could. Um, and so for me, thinking of like, if I'm going to ask that of God to bring someone else into her life, like I need to be willing to do the same for others. Um, and so just helping out anyone that you can, and understanding that any small action could be like a huge answer to a prayer, if not like directly from someone that loves them. So I think I would hope that would be my legacy.
Yeah. Dude, you're an awesome human. You got a good soul, and I think you've gone through life, and you've gone through a hard life where you've figured out how to like live a high quality life in some harder circumstances. And as a friend and just human to human, like I'm proud of where you've gotten to, and yeah, and ton of respect for who you are,
Appreciate
and
that, brother.
I'm grateful that you came on today. And anyone at home, I think there was a lot of great takeaways, and think about your life. And I think Devin's big push here is like show up for people, serve. And so my invitation to everyone at home is, uh, as we're around the holidays, think about how you can just do one kind act of service that you probably wouldn't have done, and enjoy the fruits of that, and let other people enjoy the fruits of it. But yeah, Devin, you're the man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Okay, that's a podcast.